Chapter 12, Protozoa. The learning objectives for this topic are: list 3 characteristics shared by all protozoa, discuss the reasons for the many different taxonomic schemes for protozoa, identify several features of typical eugleniid, and compare 3 types of alveolate. Compare and contrast 3 types of amoeba, describe the life cycles of plasmodial and acellular slime molds, and describe characteristic features of parabasalids, diplomonads, rhizaria, and amoebozoa. Under this topic, we'll discuss the general characteristics of protozoa, parabasala, diplomonadia, euglenozoa, alveolates, rhizaria, and amoebozoa. Let's discuss protozoa in general. Originally, they had 3 unifying characteristics. They had to be eukaryotic, they had to be unicellular, and they couldn't have a true cell wall. If you had any of those characteristics, they tossed you into protozoa. Pretty much it was, if we couldn't fit you into fungi, plants, animals, then that's where you got tossed if you were a eukaryote. Because of that, we have a very diverse group. Their distribution is all over the planet, aquatic, marine, soil, you name it, you can find protozoa, inside and outside of animals. Their morphology was very, very different, and that was one of the things that we tried to classify them by, is by their shape, whether they had flagella, whether they had cilia, etc. They have a wide range of nutrition. In fact, you name it, they got it. Everything from autotrophic photosynthesizers to parasites. In fact, some protozoa switch between being photosynthesizers during the day and heterotrophs at night, and we call those mixotrophs. Once we separated them by morphology, we tried to separate them by their nutrition, putting all of the photosynthetic ones together, all of the parasites together, etc. For reproduction, the protozoa are the first group that we're going to talk about in this class that undergoes sexual reproduction. They're able to form gametes, reproductive cells, that fuse into zygotes, creating a genetically distinct individual. This allows for more genetic diversity and allows organisms to adapt to rapidly changing environments. Now, of course, being single-celled, they can reproduce asexually as well, or make clones of themselves through mitosis. Let's talk about our first group, Parabasala. The one that I want you to remember is the genus Trichonympha. These very heavily flagellated cells are found in the guts of termites, and they aid in the digestion of cellulose. Animals do not have the enzymes to digest cellulose, so they've got to have help in their guts. And Trichonympha, which means hairy fairy in Latin, is what aids termites in destroying your home. Also in getting rid of logs and other things in the environment that we want them to do. Now, the parabasalids lack a mitochondria, and because of this, it was thought originally that they were an example of the earliest eukaryotes before the mitochondria were engulfed and became endosymbiotes. Genetic analysis reveals that they used to have mitochondria, but they lost them. But because they don't have mitochondria, they're obligate anaerobes. And you know, the gut of a termite, not a whole lot of oxygen there. Also, they have a parabasal body, which is like a Golgi body, and it performs the same function for the cell. Diplomonadia are like the parabasalids in that they don't have mitochondria, and researchers thought the same thing about them. They also don't have a Golgi body or peroxisomes, so they thought that they were very, very early eukaryotes. As it turns out, once again, we were wrong. They have a structure called a mitosome, which is what's left of their mitochondria. What is now the hypothesis, and we have a lot of data to support this, is that Diplomodia are descended from the usual eukaryotes that have the usual organelles, but somewhere along the way they lost them. and their mitochondria were reduced down to these mitosomes. Now, another characteristic of diplomonads is that they have two equal-sized nuclei, which in this micrograph of a Giardia cell makes them look like they have two eyes. That is where the diplo comes from. So remember, two nuclei, diplomodia. Here's another picture that shows their multiple flagella. Once again, this is Giardia, which causes severe intestinal distress, and it's sometimes called backpackers' diarrhea. Giardia are part of the normal flora of beavers and other mammals, and so make sure that whenever you're out in the wild country, make sure you filter your water or boil it. But Giardia forms cysts, so don't rely entirely on boiling because it won't kill the cysts. Next up, Euglenozoa. Now, this is an example of two very different kinds of organisms turning out to be related. So let's talk about the euglenids, which we get the name for the Euglenozoa. They are photosynthetic and they're mobile. They have two flagella, one long one, one itty-bitty little one. They have an eye spot that senses light so that they can swim toward the light. And of course they have chloroplasts, otherwise they wouldn't be photosynthetic. They also can move by amoeboid type movement because they don't have a cell wall. And Euglena is the example genus of the euglenids in Euglenozoa. I try to make it as simple as possible. Now let's talk about their cousins, the kinetoplastids. Kinetoplastids are all parasites. Somewhere along the line they lost their chloroplasts. Therefore, because they can't photosynthesize, they make a living off of other organisms. Now they're named kinetoplastids because they have one very large mitochondria called a kinetoplast. Also, they have this membranous kind of fin that enables them to kind of swim through the environment, and boy, it sure makes them look pretty. I wouldn't want one of them, but they're sure pretty. There are two genera that I want you to remember. Trypanosoma, which causes two different, rather related diseases. One of them is African sleeping sickness. The protozoa, the kinetoplastids, get into the brain, cause coma, the sleeping part, and usually death. Now, they are being controlled by arsenic-containing antimicrobials, but it's very hard to treat. So what we do is we do vector control, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about vectors. The other example of a disease caused by trypanosoma is Chang's disease, which is kind of the New World equivalent of African sleeping sickness. But instead of causing coma, it can cause neurological problems such as anxiety, schizophrenia, different things like that. It also tends to attack the heart and cause heart disease. Not a fun disease to have. Leishmania is a genus that has become more in the news lately. It causes severe skin ulcers that are not painful, but they are scarring, and they're carried by sandflies, and it's very common in the Middle East. In fact, leishmaniasis is also called Baghdad boil. So a lot of our returning veterans have had leishmaniasis.